From KPFK in Los Angeles, California, Valley Free Radio in Florence, Massachusetts, WNUC in Detroit, and BikeTalk.org worldwide, this is Bike Talk.
Bike Talk.
Welcome to Bike Talk. I'm Taylor Nichols.
And I'm Nick Richard.
Hey, Nick.
Hey,
how you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Where are you?
I'm in Surico, Montana. And I got to tell you, man, I did a century yesterday and I did a century today.
Oh.
I knew I was going to start picking up some speed as I got out of the mountains, but it's been really exciting. Although there are still ups and downs. Today I did 3,000 climbing. Yesterday about 5,000 feet of climbing. It's a lot of climbing. It's climbing to Denver. So it's not flat, but it's not like the mountains. What I'm learning, and we talked about this last week, are the highs and the lows of a trip like this and a ride like this. Today, this morning, I left a little town called Sand Springs. There is nothing there but a little teeny store and some camping spots behind the store. And there was a tailwind and it was slightly downhill. And I was going 22, 24 miles an hour. And I called my dad, who I'm going to see. I called him from the road while I was riding. And it was like, Nick, it was like riding for free. There was so much tailwind. I was giggling, the high. But then after about 60, 70 miles, I got to a construction zone and I had to wait for a pilot car to lead me through and all that. And then it started raining. And then the last 13 miles of my century today was a huge headwind and slightly uphill. And so with the good comes the bad. With the bad comes the good. And that's really what I'm learning. And that leads me into this first interview that I want to play. When I left Missoula, Montana a couple of days ago, I was riding about 50, 60 miles, and I didn't know where I was going to sleep, and I didn't know where I was going to eat. And I went into this little town called Ovando, Montana. And lo and behold, there was this beautiful restaurant serving prime rib, and they had space for me. It was by reservation only, but they had space for me. So I sat down after this 60-mile ride, being kind of worried where I was going to go, having this beautiful dinner and a glass of wine. So this is from the Stray Bullet in Ovando, Montana.
So this might be one of the most fun stories of my little trip. I'm getting ready to do about 150 miles in an area over the Continental Divide, which I've been told has no services. So I packed up ramen noodles and peanut butter and all that, and I left Missoula, Montana this morning in the rain and rode about 60 miles to a little town called
Ovando.
I was expecting nothing in Ovando, and at the end of the day, tired, hungry, I pull into Ovando, and there is a restaurant that is open and packed called the Stray Bullet, and I'm talking with its owner and chef,
Leigh Ann Valiton.
Yeah, hey, Leigh Ann, thank you so much for talking with me. This was really an oasis. Can you tell me a little bit about both the Stray Bullet and the town of Ovando? Because it really is a cycling mecca, I think.
It really is a cycling mecca. I've owned it for 5 years. I bought it for my best friend, Colleen, who was right over there. She had it for 11 years. I worked for her, and this is right on the route of the Tour Divide ride.
And it's also on the Lewis and Clark ride, which is what I'm doing.
Yes, Lewis and Clark, and there's one more too. I can't remember what it is. Adventure Cycling has several different tours, and probably starting Sunday, we're going to get a lot of the riders from the Great Divide ride, and it will be bicyclists all over the place. And we do cater to them because we enjoy them.
Because we're hungry.
That, and it's interesting because it's from all over the world.
Yeah.
That's what's amazing, and we just love that.
I'm from Los Angeles, and again, I've been on this road for 50 miles, and there's been nothing on the road.
Yeah.
And to come into this little teeny town and see this restaurant full of people and have a beautiful, wonderful dinner was really a surprise, and a wonderful surprise at that.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah. We have like what we call the Huskow, which is the old jail from way back in the 40s, that we have it set up for bicyclists to sleep in. And then we have a teepee and the sheep wagon. And then, of course, they can camp wherever they'd like.
Right.
And then we have a hotel across the way and a grocery store and a gas station. and laundry and a shower if that's all you want.
I think I'm going to hit all of those, actually. Are most of the people that are here tonight from the area?
Some were from Seeley Lake, but all of the rest were local.
But the population of Ovando is like 150 or something.
Ovando itself in the little town is about 40.
Wow.
And then the registered voters in this area are about 190.
Okay.
So that goes clear to Cooper's Lake. I don't know if you're riding the road or...
I'm going on the road to Great Falls, yeah.
Oh, okay. So the Tour Divide goes over Huckleberry Pass, and Cooper's Lake is up that way.
It was just a wonderful surprise for me to get here at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
At the end of my day when I was looking at ramen noodles, for my dinner, and to have a beautiful prime rib dinner that was just fantastic.
Yeah, that's a little different.
Yeah.
That's good. That's really good. Yeah.
And you said that you do it by reservation usually, but when I got here, you saw that I was hungry and you fed me.
Well, I put my menu on Facebook. I do every Wednesday night through the summer. Because we have a lot of snowbirds as well. If I have any extra, I will absolutely feed
stragglers.
Yes, bicyclists, stragglers, yes, all the above. Because why not?
Well, this has really been wonderful. It's a great stop on the Lewis and Clark ride. It's a great stop on the Great Divide ride. And if you're going to ride your bike anywhere in western Montana, you have to stop at the Stray Bullet in Ovando, Montana.
That's exactly right. And last weekend we had an 85-mile gravel race with women only. Oh, thank you.
And now she's having a beer.
Yes, I am. So there was 400 riders.
Wow. How do you feed all those people?
They brought a caterer in because we couldn't have done it.
Well, you deserve that beer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for everything, and thanks for talking on Bike Talk.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much for stopping. I appreciate it.
So after dinner, they told me that they have a teepee and a covered wagon and an old-time jail, hooskow, for cyclists to sleep in. It was great. I posted the picture of the hooskow on Instagram at taylornichols.bikelife. It was really great. I slept in this old-time jail. But going along with this high and lows of a trip like this, my bike started to malfunction. And just as I was getting to Great Falls, my front shifters, I've got Shimano 105s, they're, good shifters, weren't working. And so I seeked out a bike shop in Great Falls, Montana, and I met this guy, Brandon, and he helped me out.
Leaving Missoula, I was having some trouble with my front shifter. I wasn't able to get in and out of the big chain ring, and now I'm in Great Falls, and I walk into a bike shop, Bighorn Bike Shop.
Bighorn Bike Shop, baby.
The first thing the guy says, is you're out touring, and then I told him what the problem was, and none of this, it's going to be ready next Tuesday. He took it right away. He fixed it. He changed my chain. He said it was 150% stretch, which I totally believe. What's your name? And tell me a little bit about the shop, and what kind of biking people are doing in Great Falls, Montana.
Yeah, my name's Brandon. I've been here at Bighorn for 7 years. You're actually catching me on my very last day of my career here at Bighorn.
No.
Yeah.
Where are you going?
I'm going to go be an electrician, is the idea, at least. So.
You're giving up the bike world, eh?
Yeah, I like wrenching on things, but sure. I think we're going to move from bikes, unfortunately.
They're going to miss you. I got to tell you, you handled me great. So.
I appreciate you. Yeah, we always like to take care of the touring guys. You guys are you're doing the real work out there. Yeah, so Bighorn's been a bike shop. We've actually been in Great Falls since 1978 is when it started, and it's been a bike shop the whole time. We're the oldest Cannondale dealer in the state of Montana, too. Right. Most people around here are mountain biking, cross-country specific, just because of the way our trails are set up. We've got access to a lot of really good downhill stuff by Helena, and then, of course, down by Big Sky is super popular.
And do you get a lot of cross-country tours or not?
We do, yeah. Since we're on the northern tier route, we get them a lot.
And the Lewis and Clark route also.
Good point. Because
that's kind of what I'm on.
Oh, is it? Okay, cool. Yeah, we had 2 tours in yesterday doing west to east, and then last week we had a couple guys from Philadelphia doing east to west. It's fun to meet all sorts of different folks and all different places around the world, and I've learned a lot from touring.
I bet. And they're really lucky to have you, because I was kind of worried. I was really having trouble. I had to stay in my small chain ring on the downhill, and sometimes, you lose a little bit of power not being able to pedal through the wind and stuff. So you were a big help.
I really appreciate that. We always try to schedule out time for you touring guys, because technically I am out 6 weeks on tune-ups, but you're not going to hang out in Great Falls for 6 weeks. Let's get you taken care of. Let's get you going. going.
And you told me a good coffee shop to go to also. So, Brandon, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
And I can tell you that Bighorn's going to miss you.
And I'm going to miss Bighorn a lot, but there's still lots of great folks around here. If anyone's out there listening, come down to Bighorn. We got you taken care of.
Well, it was really great. Brandon fixed my bike, except my front shifter, Brandon, if you're listening, still is not working. Sometimes I have to use both hands, Nick, to shift from the small chain ring in the front to the big chain ring. So something is still funky about that.
I guess you got to go somewhere else.
Well, Brandon isn't working anymore, so I definitely have to go someplace else.
Now we have Gersh Kuntzman, editor of Streetsblog NYC with the New York Minute.
Well, hello from New York, where the big story, okay, maybe it's not a street story, is the New York Championship Knicks. The New York Knicks finally won a championship for the first time in 53 years. And you may be saying, why is this a New York Minute? Well, New Yorkers spilled out into the street, not just for the celebration after last week's clincher in Game 5, but also during the series. New Yorkers were watching it outdoors. People were using projectors to project the game onto the side of subway walls, onto the backs of their neighbors' houses. They were using parking spaces in probably the only good way to use parking spaces, to set up a TV so your neighbors can watch the game. And now the best part is, on Thursday, we're going to have a parade right up the Canyon of Heroes to celebrate our beloved New York Knickerbockers, and more important, to champion the use of public space in a way that celebrates the joy of being outdoors with your neighbors without cars.
There you go. That's it.
I'm Stacy with this week's news. From the Dutch Review, the driver of a car struck a group of primary school children cycling on a bike path in rural Netherlands near the Belgian border, killing 4 people, including 3 children. The group, from a school camp, was cycling along a rural highway when the motorist lost control and veered into the separated but unprotected bike path. The 19-year-old driver remains in police custody during the investigation. A college student from Japan, Yuro Sato, biked 1,200 miles from Pittsburgh's south side to Arlington, Texas, over the course of a month to watch his home team compete in the World Cup. He bought a new bike in Pittsburgh, loaded it with bags and a Japanese flag, and made it to the first match just in time on Sunday, where Japan tied the Netherlands 2-2. And topping that, 3 friends spent nearly a year biking the 11,000 miles from Argentina to the U.S. to support their home team in the World Cup. Vicente Conculini and his friends departed from Gualeguaychú, a city in eastern Argentina, in August 2025. For their efforts, the chair of Johnson County, Kansas, presented them with tickets to the Argentina-Algeria game. That's right, these guys biked all the way without tickets, and it was even sweeter since Argentina prevailed 3-0.
You know, Nick, we're kind of on the front lines of advocacy for safe streets. Last week, Stacy in her news talked about Riley O'Neill, who was a leader in the Safe Streets movement, who was killed. Well, we have Chris Gentry with us today from Chicago Bike Grid Now. Chris, welcome to Bike Talk.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really tragic what happened to Riley O'Neill. He was a critical member of the Chicago Department of Transit's Complete Streets team. He was in charge of the bike parking programs across the city, especially for schools. I quite literally have a Riley created bike rack in front of my apartment right now. And yeah, he was killed, doored in a painted bike lane into a semi-truck on Halstead and Bridgeport last week.
Wow. It's ironic that here we are fighting for safe streets and then something like this happens.
It's really, I think, indicative of a citywide priority problem where we might have a Department of Transportation that talks about a want for complete streets, yet one of their own is a fatality of their lack of meaningful infrastructure, just like we have in a painted lane, you know?
He was doored and then pushed into a semi that was moving behind him. And of course, that's the problem with painted infrastructure. It's not really infrastructure. You know, you're in the door zone and a door opens and it knocks you into the moving traffic lane. I've always been told that if you see a door opening, turn your bike into the door and run right into the car.
Because it's safer than the alternative. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We know that like painted bike lanes have a negligible, if any, impact on actual safety, and they don't really make anyone more likely to ride their bikes in the first place. that was one of the things we were basically trying to call out. The Sunday after his death, so about 3 days later, we organized a pretty huge memorial ride where we rode from the nearby park to the site where he died, and we staged a die-in. I think we had probably 500 or 600 people in the ride. Wow. About 300 participating in the die-in portion. So we laid in the streets for 5 minutes where Riley was taken out, mostly trying to highlight the abysmal safety record. Bike accidents are up 46% in the city. This is our 6th bike scooter death of the year, 3rd bike death of the year, and trying to find ways to highlight the lack of city priority given to bike and pedestrian safety in Chicago.
A couple of weeks ago, we had a couple of advocates from Los Angeles, Damian Kevitt and Jonathan Hale, talking about the state of emergency of our streets in Los Angeles. And I think this just proves that it's also in Chicago and New York and Atlanta and Miami and New Orleans and Phoenix and whatever other city we want to mention.
We're so tied into car-dependent development, and especially as we're seeing gas prices soar, the cost of owning a car soar, it really drives people into finding alternative ways of transportation, like cycling. We know this in the city of Chicago as well. Biking is up more than 200% in the last 5 years, especially on the northwest and southwest sides. We're seeing biking increase at a pretty rapid rate. We're having more new cyclists on the road, more people trying to get on the road. At the same time, you don't have the infrastructure that's needed to actually do that work. And that's why, state of emergency is real. And we had a follow-up ride to the Sunday ride. Smaller crowd, about 70 or so folks. And we biked to the Alderwoman's office. And we called out all of the deaths that have happened in her ward. Because since she took over office, there's been 214 cyclist crashes in her ward alone, out of 50 wards in the city. And so we kind of call that out because for us, the organizational name is Chicago Bike Grid Now, because I don't want to wait till I'm old to be able to have safe streets. I want to be able to make it to the point where I'm old and have the infrastructure in the first place. That was the thing that was so scary about Riley's death, is that's an area that I and my friends bike on so often. And the forever fear that what if we're the next one?
Chris Gentry, thank you so much for coming on, and keep Riley's spirit alive.
Will do. Appreciate y'all.
Now we have a panel put together by Karen Douglas of Culprit Media, and Karen wanted to talk about funding open streets events for people.
Right, how to keep them going, right.
Here's a conversation with John Surico, who's involved with the 31st Avenue Open Street Collective in Queens, New York. And we have Max Musicant, who does open streets events in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Dr. Adonia Lugo, the author of Bicycle Race, also a co-founder of Ciclavia in LA, and a member of the California Transportation Commission. Tafarai Bayne, friend of the show, frequent guest, co-founded Ciclavia and is the chief strategist for Ciclavia. Great. And we have Darin Wing, who's the executive director of Livable City in San Francisco, which puts on their open street event, Sunday Streets. It's an annual event. And we have Yuliya Flynn, who is an entrepreneur who wants to find creative funding models for bike infrastructure and open streets.
Wow, quite the panel.
Yeah. Karen is going to take it away. Here's Karen.
So simply put, open street events close a public street to cars for a day or a couple of hours, and within that time, they really give the street a new purpose. Open streets have become very popular over the past 15 years, and yet, like so many popular community programs today, leaders are having to rethink how to keep them going as federal and state funding becomes more and more unreliable. So that's why I brought you all here today. I know there's a lot we can learn from you about why open streets are important and how we can creatively approach funding them. John, let's start with you. What's your experience been in New York City?
The Open Streets program in New York City started as an emergency response to the pandemic. The Open Street in Astoria, Queens, 31st Avenue Open Street, that I have the pleasure and privilege of being a part of, came during that time in April 2020. And this was really just to create space in the neighborhood where we don't have a huge access to parkland. Our open street is fully closed to traffic and parking, and it creates places for people to sit, enjoy programming, enjoy workshops, while also bike safely through and to walk through in their own neighborhood. Open streets were then made permanent by law a year later in New York City, and they've now been going on for 6 or 7 years since 2020. And I would say they really exist to do two things. The first is to calm the traffic network and create spaces for cycling and walking. And the second, which is not to be overlooked, is to create places to be and to stay. The secret sauce when it works really well is when the Open Streets program is seen as an iterative design process where you try to see different ways that you can redesign a street. Our Open Street was running for about 5 or 6 years before the city fully redesigned the avenue. So now the avenue looks totally different. It's been turned into what's known as a bike boulevard, where traffic has been rerouted. Our Open Street, the 2 blocks we do the Open Street on, has completely permanent pedestrian infrastructure. And now there's a 2-way bike lane that exists throughout. That's that gradual process when we start to get into full capital reconstruction and actually putting in the street redesign, showing people what it could be.
Max Musicant here in the Twin Cities, our first Open Street sprang from advocacy efforts from the bike community, initiating the first one and then a series of them in Minneapolis to demonstrate the power of and the benefits of more pedestrianized, bike-centric infrastructure. And so my group would be brought in to envision and produce a variety of Open Streets events in urban environments like downtown St. Paul, our neighboring Twin City, as well as like suburban and small town communities. Supporting communities that are using it as a tool to achieve some broader goals. The secret sauce in making them successful is to really focus on shared benefits, shared success, the human experience, demonstrating what's possible through a one-day or larger effort, usually then aligned towards some commercial goals, if it's about revitalization of a commercial district, the public health benefits, traffic calming, and then just inherent community building and relationship work. So I think one of the recipes is to make sure you're linking your broader goals into your sort of tactical implementation of these Open Streets to increase your chances of that broader success and continual expansion of safe streets.
Thanks, guys. I love how you both approach Open Streets as really a method for exploring what's possible in public spaces. Let's hear from Adonia and Tafarai next. Adonia, you co-founded Ciclovia in Los Angeles. What inspired you to start it?
I first learned about the Open Streets concept through a street film that was making the rounds in late 2007, early 2008. I was an anthropology PhD student at UC Irvine. I was starting to really wonder what made riding a bicycle feel so scary. So I was kind of learning about that stuff in my PhD program. And it all kind of clicked that I was like, well, I think I'm going to try and study this, like what's going on in our streets and see if we can do something about it, right? Like I was wanting to do some engaged research where you're not just studying, but you're actually a partner in trying to make changes as well. And so the Ciclovia model, which I learned about from that street film, was something I got to go witness in person in Bogota, Colombia in the summer of 2008. I actually got to meet one of the original creators of the event, which has its origins in the 1970s in Bogota, Jaime Ortiz Mariño. So getting to meet him was really impactful for me. I got to see how Ciclovia works in Bogota, where they close over 70 miles of streets throughout the city every Sunday. I got to witness that. And what did it look like in a city where that had been in place in various forms for quite a long time? So just it being a normal part of the landscape. And I got to speak with this really creative thinker who helped me put it in the context of disruption and changing culture, using creative interventions in streets to affect not just transportation behavior, but really how we interact with each other in public space. To me, that's what Open Streets are about. Coming to these routine, regular, normal places of everyday movement and saying, we can actually relate to each other differently. It is possible.
Yes. I love that perspective and that origin story. Tafarai, how'd you get involved with Ciclovia?
My involvement in Open Streets comes after Adonia was so inspired and worked with a group of leaders in LA to sort of get that first event going, right? Prior to that, I have been doing community organizing in South Los Angeles. I grew up in South LA, I'm born in Angeles, very, very much diehard Angelino here, and was born and raised in a community where issues of displacement, gentrification were starting to come to the forefront. And that was kind of the space of organizing I was working in. And one thing that folks were concerned about was the reality of just moving about the community. They were really scared to have their kids walk across streets and really get around, just go to school, be outside even because of car traffic. And so that was a constant conversation folks were having. At that time, we started moving toward looking at bike lanes and pedestrian infrastructure. As organizers, we realized there was a lot of money going into that at that time, but they weren't being targeted in our community. And so that not only pissed us off, but got us activated to get us in those rooms. And so as we started advocating those rooms, we started really paying attention and doing a lot of bike riding and community engagement around bike lanes and really informing those plans. At the exact same time, we're kind of looking for bigger interventions we can do. And I remember having a day at home and looking in LA Weekly and coming across an ad in LA Weekly for this thing called Ciclovia. I saw it and immediately thought about it as an intervention or an organizing tool. I thought about what it means to transform streets, to transform a street into basically a park for a day. I really immediately recognized what that could do for our communities. And so I attended the first event. I was really blown away. I mean, it was like drinking the Kool-Aid immediately when you see like a street that you grew up on, Melrose through the downtown. These are streets I've been on my whole life. Doing it as an open street event, doing it on my bike, cars being gone, the air smelling different, the sound being viscerally different. It's just mind-blowing when you in a city like LA. And so I immediately was looking for the organizers and started hounding them. And I actually tracked down this guy, Joe Linton, who was one of the organizers and sort of staff people at the time. I was like, hey, I want to talk to you about Ciclovia. I want to bring it to South LA. That's how it all started. 15 years ago, I hit them up at a party, their group meeting. I remember first meeting Adonia in those rooms. And I basically just joined that effort to help establish it.
Thanks, Tafarai. I love how you view these events as turning streets into parks for a day. These kinds of interventions are really valuable for communities. Now, Darin, you run an open streets program out of San Francisco. What's your experience been?
Sunday Streets is a series of 6 roughly 1-mile events. The funny thing is when I volunteered my first Sunday Streets about 2019 or 2018, I wasn't totally impressed by it. My background in youth development, we would work with 1,000 kids every day or at least every week for years. So I was actually a little bit skeptical. Like I appreciated the one-day party thing, but I was like, oh, okay, I'm hearing all these amazing things that happen because of not even one day, 4 hours. 4 hours doesn't mean anything in youth development. I've spent a lot of time talking to people at Sunday Streets like, so what are you doing here? Why do you come here? I'm now a convert. And probably the most beautiful thing I've seen is talking to some younger parents, let's say in their 30s, and they'll have a little kid or 2 or 3 or whatever. And they'll say, oh, I've been coming to Sunday Streets since it started back in 2008. And now look, my kids are growing up in it. And the importance of traditions, even if they're only 4 hours once a year, the importance of a neighborhood tradition. And so going back to my more developmental mindset, I've been looking at how does this one-day event, how does the process of creating it, who creates it, and what happens afterwards, how does that impact the community? How does that help with issues of gentrification, stabilization, wealth building? I've been looking mostly toward how these events empower the local community and make the conditions of life in the local community better, which does include the safe streets aspects and how it leads to that.
Thanks, Darin. I appreciate the youth development perspective on this and how it frames the overall impact Sunday Streets is having in your communities. I'm going to hand it to Yuliya out of Washington, D.C. next. And Yuliya, feel free to open up the conversation a bit afterwards. So you're approaching this as an entrepreneur who's currently launching a cycling race event inspired by the Open Streets model. Can you tell us more about that?
It started all for me when I started cycling during the pandemic and spending more time on the streets and realizing the benefits of open and safe streets. And from there, it kind of progressed through my entrepreneurial adventures to see open streets more as an opportunity than just a public space. I see open space or open streets as an asset that every town has, and they just don't always know how to utilize it properly. As an entrepreneur, I started thinking, well, how can we tackle this problem without expanding or spending government resources? Can we look at this more from a private perspective? What can private sponsors or businesses do? There was an event in 2025. It was a national championship race in Charleston, West Virginia. And the economic impact from that event was estimated to be about $6 million for the local community, which is amazing. I think they reported it doubled from the year before. So the small seed collaboration that we can put in at the launch of that event can translate into a huge impact in the community. So I'm currently kind of developing a proof of concept model for small towns to work with the private investors or sponsors who are willing to put initial capital, perhaps backed by the governments, but not using the government's capital. And I'm curious, in your opinion, what is the biggest challenge? Is it the budget, or are there other hurdles that are even more important?
I'm happy to answer that question. I think you're 100% spot on that open streets are an economic development tool in many ways. We think it's going to be crucial for small businesses to survive, to enhance the pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. We know that when you add these things to streets, it boosts foot traffic. And especially when often these businesses' biggest competitor is the internet, it's really good to encourage local buying and local shopping. So we definitely see it as that. Open street groups or organizations that want to start this shouldn't rely on one source of revenue. The biggest hurdle for government is that it takes forever to get paid back for them, to be honest. We're pretty intentional from the get-go because of that long lag time, especially as an all-volunteer group, to try to figure out where we get revenue elsewhere. Yes, we will still take that money from the government, but we don't want to rely on it entirely. Government could lower the barriers for these local organizations to raise their own revenue. We raise revenue primarily through markets, some sponsorships, some discretionary grants, all these things. To be honest, a lot of those private grants and private foundations, it's tons of paperwork to get discretionary dollars from elected officials and from philanthropic sources. And that's just a lot of work, especially if it's volunteers doing this work. Markets, on the other hand, and other kind of like immediate capital, not only can you lower the barrier for entrepreneurs to be able to sell their wares and be able to do these things, you can like add not a nominal amount of revenue and be able to operate a street, which I think is really important. So we try to get a revenue from diverse sources. I think it really helps to not rely on one. We've increasingly looked elsewhere instead of public dollars while still keeping up the pressure for the city to be funding this. But I think it's just healthy to build resiliency into your budget and look elsewhere. That comes from applying to other sources, but also figuring out how your street itself can generate revenue and what else can you be doing that could attract sponsorships, activations, markets, and things like that.
There's two avenues that John also touched on. It's like one is raising revenue, and then two is like lowering cost. In larger cities, you can viably, as John was mentioning, raise revenue from the activations of the event itself. In the Midwest and in other more sprawling cities, you're starting from a lower base. The opportunity to generate revenue from market and vendor fees and participant fees is lower initially, especially as you're building up the momentum there. So initial seed funding from foundations or the government or public health, sometimes insurance companies have a good arm to reach out to in terms of if they've got a public health effort. On the reducing cost side, the two biggest barriers I've found is the amount of time it takes to fill out the permits to close a street. So if cities can reduce the variance on what that means, have a standardized process, not to treat open streets like a gigantic, well-funded festival, but a grassroots operation. And then the requirements around the robustness of street closure. How are you closing those streets? Are you required to do cement J barriers that need like a forklift to put in there? Or can you use just basic bollards? And then security requirements that the cities have and insurance requirements can be a huge driver. If you need to hire off-duty police officers versus just stationing your own volunteers at certain areas, that can be an enormous cost driver that can be hard to overcome on the front end. So I think cities can do a lot by not necessarily providing money, not even providing staff, but just by making it easier and more affordable for community organizations and other entrepreneurs to produce these events themselves.
Yuliya, I'm curious. As an attorney, have you organized deals with private money for events like this?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I actually worked on a project, a public event. I think it was a concert, and the private investor decided to invest in the project, but not in exchange for any equity or specific profit. The key things that were important to him, of course, is to get the money back. But it was also about accountability, making sure that the event was benefiting the public and there were meaningful outcomes from it. It was not just driven purely by money, but in fact, it was driven by an underlying purpose, which was to better the community, to improve the community and perception of events like this. It really goes back to, I think, the underlying discussion we're having. It's about collaboration. It definitely involves the organizers who have to present the data, but it also requires the government support, maybe lowering the barriers for entry. And then, of course, investors who become more interested because it becomes more enticing to have less barriers and more participation. From my private perspective, I do invest in different projects, and I get extremely excited by events that are for social good that may, produce results for future generations.
And John, in your experience working with New York City officials, what's important for stakeholders to know, and what else can cities do?
For me, providing the user experience to policymakers and to folks doing this work is really, really important. Great example, literally happening this morning. We're doing a lot of World Cup programming coming up, which is really exciting. We as Open Street groups have been handed down this programming from the DOT, which we're happy to see, but we're now in charge of coordinating like this massive event, which is like kind of crazy. And telling the city that like, hey, this is like a lot for a group to put on. The DOT should be helping out with this. So they can hear that perspective. They often don't hear that user experience. They need to hear that like, this is a lot. And like, how is it going on the other side of the equation, right? They're often legislating or funding or putting programs into being, but how did those actually go into effect and kind of are felt on the ground? The permitting is such a good example of that, where means well, there's a reason why we have permits, but the actual user experience of going through the permitting is terrible and kind of prevents people from even doing this in the first place and wanting to do this, and has the kind of inadvertent effect of closing opportunities to permit streets. So providing that perspective is real. I honestly think the city probably has access to better data than we could provide for cycling rates, for example, for walking rates. And they should be doing that work. Also like foot traffic counts or credit card sales or things like that. Any sort of city or town, that should be kind of on them because it's hard as a volunteer or citizen group to do that work. Getting all of this in front of folks and making sure all these perspectives are heard is incredibly important. And to be able to justify the project's funding going forward, it also expand it to other neighborhoods.
I love how you and Max both brought up ways cities can support these programs, even if directly funding them isn't possible. I agree that reducing this kind of government friction would definitely attract more opportunities, and I think it also support a city's broader economic development goals too. Tafarai, you've been organizing events in LA for 15 years. What's your take on this?
I always wonder how these things are funded in other countries. And our American system of dealing with these things means we're dealing with a public-private situation, right? Where if we were to do this purely as a private endeavor, cost of permits and the cost of public services and then the cost of staffing it and stuff starts to get pretty high. And even in a public-private partnership, there's still the expectation that there's some cost recovery happening. But I think there's something to be said about the need for public ownership of these events to some degree because of the intense cost and the fact that this is a free event for the public, right? I like the park framing for a number of reasons, also because of the public responsibility around parks. We see it as a public need, and therefore public dollars go to it. And I think that has to be a frame for our open street events. If we talk about completely paying for these through private dollars, it doesn't feel sustainable to me. And I think that's something we discuss here in LA about these events and trying to ensure that they happen with a kind of frequency that provides the kind of impact that they need to have and they should have, right? And so I just think that we have to keep in mind that we have to wrangle on what these things cost, try to make them more cost efficient, but as this public good, there has to be a factor that there's a reality that the public and our government need to take responsibility for these events and put money towards them as a public good. It's a pre-event. It's not Coachella here we're talking about where you can go for sponsored dollars and they expect a certain kind of return. It's something we have to wrangle with. We don't talk about it enough in terms of the sustainability of these events.
I think you brought up several good points here about how funding sources really influence a program's long-term feasibility. Like if a city wants to make this an institution, they should invest in it. And so I think this is a good segue to hear from Adonia and her experience serving on the California Transportation Commission. Adonia, what kind of projects is California funding right now?
Something that really stood out to me was within our state transportation funding landscape, we have a number of programs that can include active transportation infrastructure, right? So Caltrans districts and regional transportation planning agencies are really moving toward including more multimodal infrastructure in their planning. However, what gets called non-infrastructure, which is what open streets would fall under, is not eligible for funding in any program except for the Active Transportation Program, ATP. So ATP is a very popular state funding program. It gets way more applications from cities and agencies than can be funded. And it is the only funding program where you can get funding for something like an open street event directly. Within ATP, the breakdown of what's going to active transportation infrastructure versus non-infrastructure, the programming, the education and encouragement stuff, it's pretty stark. The vast majority of the funding is going to infrastructure. So in terms of where our priorities are, the state has taken a very infrastructure-oriented approach. We really expect our transportation dollars to be infrastructure investments, largely because we associate infrastructure investment with jobs. And so, unfortunately, the active transportation label in some ways has helped to obscure the need for this kind of activation work because it's seen as not being as important as building highways, getting those union workers out there. So I'm actually working on a research project right now through my role at the UCLA Institute of Transportation Studies to try and understand the active transportation workforce and what kind of job quality considerations there are. We have a lot of unexplored work to do thinking about active transportation jobs. What are the jobs that get produced by something like an open street event? Are they, the beginning of career pathways for people who historically have not gone into urban planning or design or engineering? What is the value that we get out of investment in these roles? We have this kind of imagined formula like, oh, yes, these kind of activations are going to lead to infrastructure investment. Well, for one thing, do they? There's some evaluation needed there. For another thing, why are we treating them like the desired outcome is infrastructure change? Actually, the desired outcome is having residents who feel like they can use many modes of transportation. And in some cases, the infrastructure is already there. It just hasn't been activated in a way that's culturally relevant. So I'm very interested in thinking about how we can shift from calling this kind of work in a funding landscape, education and encouragement or non-infrastructure, and looking at it more in terms of what are the jobs that are necessary and how are we missing out on opportunities to further invest in activating our multimodal transportation infrastructure that we've been investing in for quite some time in California and not necessarily seeing the results from that we've expected. So unless we actually create these opportunities to literally give people a place to kind of mess around and be silly and try to build an embodied relationship with these ways of traveling, what makes us think that the presence of a bike lane is going to somehow magically bring people out? We have a ways to go to really start to talk about the value of this work in the same vocabulary that moves transportation dollars in the state.
Darin, what's your experience been with this in San Francisco?
We did get completely defunded by the city of San Francisco. I shouldn't say completely. We have a partnership with SFMTA where they do bus rerouting and actually help to pay for some of the insurance. Mm-hmm. Our main city support from the Department of Public Health completely disappeared about 4 months ago. We're only here by the skin of our teeth that livable city donors stepped up, and we raised $300,000 from individuals in the last 2 months and have saved the program. Open Streets, or at least Sunday Streets, I'll say our specific program, has health impacts. We don't save lives. We help small businesses. But you know what? We're not a small business support organization. We improve mental health. I'm not a psychologist. Money that has saved us has come from a really deep place of community and personal love for something that is not describable on a funding application. This cannot be put in a proposal. You cannot say, give us money because people love this. maybe a little bit better than a snowflake's chance in hell to get some city money. It's going to be from the economic and workforce development side. We're just barely beginning to explore a job creation aspect, but it's more about the small businesses and the pop-ups and the opportunities we give to brick and mortar, but also micro entrepreneurs. The merchants where we do Sunday Streets, they've been telling us that Sunday Streets is much more effective for them than the night markets, even though the night markets were pointedly created for economic development. The merchants say that we create more long-term relationships. This is the first time in my experience of having a program that when it was threatened, people just came out of the woodwork to help it.
Darin, I love hearing about building community trust through your Sunday Streets program. And I'm also liking this transition in our conversation towards relationship building. Tafarai, I'd like to hear from you about this next. Ciclavia organizes some of the largest open street events in the country. How do you pull that off while making it still feel like a community event?
That's a big question. There are so many stakeholders at any one event, and no matter what neighborhood we're in, we have representation from practically every zip code in the county. This feeling of ownership, I think, is really important to the success of these events. We really disrupt neighborhood, right? Like we disrupt physical space. We do a massive amount of mitigation at our events, right? Like if we take somebody's parking lot, we're looking for an alternate parking lot. If we are blocking a driveway, we're double checking to make sure they don't have an alternate out. If they don't, we're providing some way for them to have access to the space or giving them alternate parking spaces, I think it's really about ensuring that these events are as much a win-win for community members as possible, right? And an opportunity for culture to be reflected, right? I think one thing I really we talk about here is this isn't about just these neighborhoods we're in. It's about the people and the culture in these communities that we're getting to touch. Like, how do we make sure folks feel like this is their space, right? This is their front yard that's being opened up for folks to come out to their front lawn and throw a barbecue if they want to have a pickup basketball game in the street if they want to, or pick up soccer game in the street. Like, our team door knocks every door along every route, like 2 to 3 times. We're flying every car. We're doing blocks outreach as well. We're hitting the schools in the community. We're hitting libraries in the community. We're going to business improvement district meetings. We're going to neighborhood council meetings. Our outreach is really intensive. And I think that's a big part of ensuring that stakeholders feel engaged. Even when we do these engagements and we have a little bit of blowback from certain stakeholders, we've had like certain businesses, historic businesses in neighborhoods be very pissed at us at first about the possibility of us coming and disrupting their Sunday, right? And some churches are really have, given us heat about those Sundays. But I'm always really proud of my team because they have the hard conversations. Like they take those hard calls and then they follow up after the event to see if things are good. And if folks have an issue, then let us know. But oftentimes that feedback is now, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. that was actually pretty good for us.
Darin, how do you approach this with Sunday Streets?
I think we all know that we should engage the community. We're experimenting with trying another level of that, which is giving other people ownership or putting Sunday Streets at the service of what other groups want to do. So just real quickly, in Excelsior, we met a group, mostly Salvadorans, and they said, well, we've been wanting to do a festival for years. And I said, well, just do it inside Sunday Streets. So they had their own festival, their own branding, their own posters, and it made that Sunday Streets probably the best ever. You couldn't believe the merchants that came out and all the activities. And now it's leading to this deeper discussion about wealth building. What I believe is that there'll be a virtuous circle, that as we work on wealth building, whether it's working class homeowners or the small business people, that we'll create this really deep trust that will circle back to safe streets. And that love, that trust, that's what's coming back to us to help us stay alive. What I've been telling people now is Sunday Streets is not the end, it's the beginning. And an open street is a wonderful, neutral space. And creating an open street is a wonderful, neutral goal. I just learned at one of our events, some of my friends were saying, Darin, we saw people out at the same time in our whole lives. 40 years, we've never seen them out in the same space at the same time. That one floored me. I was not ready for that.
Our police partners in LA have told us that crime literally goes down in the neighborhoods we do our open street event in.
Wow, that's really powerful. And Darin, that really connects to what you were saying about how open streets are just the beginning of seeing these kinds of community changes. Tafarai, what would you recommend to someone who wants to bring in an open street event to their town?
If you want to get this started in your own community, it's about involving as many different kinds of perspectives in the planning and engagement of it as possible. I think that speaks to Adonia's experience in terms of that first group in LA that got together, the various different kinds of skills and perspectives that came together as a founding committee and sort of leveraged all that to get it started. Bringing all that to bear is how you get these kind of complicated events started and stuff.
Adonia, anything you'd like to add?
Just how important Tafarai's work has been to building Ciclavia as an institution in LA. I think that it has given Ciclavia a shape that it wouldn't have had otherwise. And it really connects with what Darin's saying in terms of we need to be thinking about the economic development aspect of what these events are doing. We need more hard facts about the effects of these investments, and totally agree that looking at the economic side of it could help with that.
Yeah, I love how we landed on economic development too. Max, do you have any advice for groups getting started?
A great frame that I like to use is just like a minimally viable action. What's the minimally viable real thing that we can do collectively, whether as like a group of volunteers or an organization or a business effort to start the snowball. And so what's the thing to get something real to happen and seeing opportunities when they arise? Are there construction projects happening that they're already going to be closing the street and you can do something on the front or back end to leverage that? Is there, in some communities, National Night Out is a big thing where they sanction the street closures. Can you work off of a festival, but turn that festival into an open streets event? Look for those places where there's already natural synergies, and that can be a great place to have like a minimally viable product and get the open streets work started.
Yuliya, any legal or business tips for our listeners?
I always tell all my clients and every business I can get involved in is know your risks. If you know them, you can navigate around them. If you don't know, you'll get trapped.
Good advice. Thanks, Yuliya. John, you've been able to build some impressive momentum over the past 6 years. How can other groups do the same?
We had the benefit of when we decided to do something on 31st Ave and the kind of heat of the pandemic in 2020, neighbors put forward a couple of different avenues that we thought could be good, that were kind of mixed use, not fully commercial, not fully residential, and had like a nice mix and not crazy amounts of car traffic. The one they ended up choosing was an avenue that they had their eyes on for a long time and wanted to do something with. So the city had intentionality for wanting to do the open street there or permitting neighbors to go forward with it. What's important to keep in mind, I think, like I'm such a believer of tactical urbanism and just doing the thing over and over and over and over again, and again, that takes a lot of sweat equity, no doubt, to do this for 4 or 5 years as an all volunteer group. That's why I think just as much attention has to be put on the city government to be lowering barriers so you don't have burnout from volunteers or whatever groups, that you make it easy to go for a couple of years. There is this message of doing the damn thing, but then doing it with frequency and repetition that I think allows this inertia to be able to build up political support, political will, investment. As we did it more and more seasons, the city gave us more and more things because we showed that we really cared about this and the community really liked it. That's an important kind of relationship to build and to foster in any town and city, that you should be wanting to support your neighbors trying to do this work and make it easier for them to do it.
Wonderful. Thanks, John. And big thanks to Max, Yuliya, Adonia, Tafarai, and Darin as well for joining us. For our listeners out there, you can follow John on his Street Beat Substack newsletter and find his research on urban policy at nycfuture.org. You can follow Max's work on LinkedIn and his Practice of Place Substack channel. You can follow Adonia's work at urbanadonia.com and follow her research on the UCLA Institute of Transportation Studies website at its.ucla.edu. You can follow Tafarai's work and future Ciclavia events at ciclavia.org. You can follow Darin's work and future Livable City events at livablecity.org or sundaystreets.sf. And you can follow Yuliya's work and her bike race project on LinkedIn and her website, yuliyaflynn.com. That's YULIYAFLYNN.com. Thanks for tuning in today, and remember to support your local open streets.
The takeaway for me is that open streets can have all kinds of funding sources. Should Ciclavia be funded publicly, or is it okay if there's ads?
If the UFC fighting at the White House can have ads, Open Streets can have ads.
All right.
You know, Nick, I want to go back to one more person that I met. I was in this little town called Fort Benton, Montana. This guy on a bike rode up to me like he knew me. He was like, hey, and he wanted to know where I was coming from and where I was going. And we talked for a little while about the road that I was going to go on and where I was going to go. And he told me where to go to have a beer. He told me where to have dinner and where to camp.
So I'm in a beautiful little town called Fort Benton, Montana. I've got about 50 miles in. It's 3:30 in the afternoon, and a biker pulls up to me and says, hey, man, where are you going? Where are you coming from? And this is Tim. Hey, Tim.
Hey, how's it going?
You know, he was really helpful in giving me information because sometimes you don't get a lot of information. Tell me a little bit about the biking in Fort Benton and what kind of biking you're doing, because you got a beautiful bike.
I do mostly long distance bike packing. Unfortunately, I don't get enough time to do a lot of it, but I do mostly gravel roads and the divide and things like that. Fort Benton is a pretty cool little place. It's off the map a little bit, but it is one of the trail towns in the Montana Trail 406. That's a brand new trail we're just trying to get some recognition on. It goes all the way across Montana and west to east and actually north to south, all at the same time.
I got to tell you, I think my next trip's going to be gravel, because what you and I were just talking about is traffic. It's a bummer sometimes. In gravel, you don't have that.
Yeah, gravel, you can really get away with a lot of stuff. You can ride about wherever you want most of the time and jam to some tunes while you're doing it. And
I've been doing that.
Kicking ass.
Yeah. Well, Tim, what else do I need to know about Fort Benton or Geraldine, where I'm going, or what?
Geraldine, there's a park you can camp at, there's a store, there's a bar, there's a bed and breakfast if they have a room. One other thing about Geraldine, if you find the school there, you're welcome to go pitch a tent back behind the school, and if anybody says anything to you, tell them the maintenance man said it's great to be there.
Well, that's great, because you told me that you worked there.
Yes.
Okay, that's huge, because sometimes just knowing that someone said it, it's probably okay or whatever, makes you feel a lot better when you're doing that kind of stealth camping.
Yeah, there's a place between the school and the swimming pool in town, and there's a lot of grass there. If anybody says anything to you, just tell them that the maintenance guy said you could hang out for a night.
Tim, thanks, man. That's really, really helpful.
Good to meet you.
Absolutely. Good to meet you. Take care, man.
Thanks for sharing, Taylor.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim, and thanks for everybody that I met along the way.
Good show.
We want to thank a lot of people. Chris Gentry, all the people from the Open Streets event, the Stray Bullet, and we want to thank Tim, Brandon at the bike shop in Great Falls, Montana, and we want to thank our regulars, Julie Richard, Josh Hagland, Kevin Burton, Lindsay Sturman, Stacy Randecker, and Amy Zirin. Thanks to you and also to Marga for picking up the slack in my life while I'm on the road, because I know this is a lot of work.
These are the best episodes we've had in a while. Anyway, thanks, Taylor.
Ride safe.
And that was Bike Talk. If you have a story, a tip, or a topic, head over to biketalk.org and send us a message. Talk again next week.
Got yourself a bike. Oh, got yourself a bike. Oh, got yourself a bike.